Hello, children. Welcome to Literature Learning. Who is a patriot? We all are patriots, aren't we? A patriot is someone who has very strong support for his nation and also does things to make his or her nation proud. Such a person is usually looked upon with great reverence by people of that nation, and he is provided with political authority over the affairs of the nation. The Patriot, written by Robert Browning, is a hero who returns to his town amid much celebration. The poem is a dramatic monologue where the main character is the only one talking to himself in a dramatic manner. The poem is a description by the patriot about how people have changed in a year's time and how once glorious deeds of his has now been judged by his misdeeds of a year. It is a sad commentary on the rise and fall of the patriot as a result of whimsical crowd mentality. Therefore, let's begin straight away the line by line explanation of the poem. The first stanza. The poem begins with the narrator, the patriot, describing an event, a grand public welcome that took place a year ago on that very same day. He is reminiscing the past and he builds a picture for us as he remembers that day, the day he returns to his country amid celebrations when everyone is waiting to greet him and have a glimpse of him. So let's read the first stanza. It was roses, roses all the way, with myrtle mixed in my path like mad. The patriot says that the people have decorated the whole of the city. They have put lots and lots of rose petals with myrtle mixed in them on the path that he was walking on. Roses, roses all the way is a popular saying signifying that it was all bright and welcoming. Myrtle is a fragrant flower of an evergreen ancient shrub, and the flowers had a great ceremonial role in many civilizations. Myrtle flowers are loved and respected in many cultures due to the many benefits they have. They are often considered as the perfect symbol of love and companionship. In some areas, myrtle flowers are considered to bring good luck, wealth, and prosperity. You can see the importance of the myrtle flower by the fact that during her wedding, Queen Victoria wore a tiara of myrtle flowers. The narrator, the patriot, is welcomed with great enthusiasm. His paths were festooned with flowers, with roses and myrtle mixed with them by the townspeople with feverish joy, and this makes the narrator use the term like mad. So let's read further. The house roofs seemed to heave and sway. Now, the roofs of the houses of the streets from where he was going were so crowded that they seemed to swing. People standing on the roofs of their houses cheered for him. People were overwhelmingly delighted to greet the hero and were enthusiastic to see him as he passed by, and the cheering crowd were so feverishly overjoyed that even the roofs of the houses seemed to sway. Meaning, it seemed to heave and sway, meaning it seemed to lift and raise. That is, the image of the overcrowding shows the importance of the patriot. It suggests that he is a celebrity at the moment, one that everyone wants to see. And the last couple of lines of the stanza, the church spires flamed, such flags they had a year ago on this very day. Now, meaning of church spires, tower of the church. And here you have the heave and the sway. Heave is the lifting up, or the sway, swinging. Now, the narrator, the patriot, remembers the scene very vividly and tells us that the towers of the churches and or the spires were all decorated with flaming flags, and it seemed that they were up in flames. The phrase the church spires flamed. Now, this implies that the minarets and domes of churches seem to be in flames due to the massive decoration of colorful flags, flaming flags, put all over them for decoration purpose. And says the Patriot in the last line, this event took place 1 year ago. So, exactly that very same day, the thought of which brings back memories and pictures that are still so fresh in his mind. Now, it is only logical to assume that this grand celebration must be as a result of some achievement on the speaker's narrator's part. Perhaps it was a victory in war, or the gathering for fighting one, or winning a popular election to an office, or being nominated as a ruler, or maybe something else. It can be assumed at this point in the poem that it is concerned with the common people. And they were happy on the occasion. Whatever it may have been, the Patriot is seen as a public hero in this stanza, who is greeted with much love and affection by the commoners, the citizens of the town. He had done something which other people couldn't do for the town, which made the citizens of the town very happy and proud of the Patriot for his deed. So, second stanza. We now move to the stanza and let's read the first two lines. The air broke into a mist with bells. The old walls rocked with the crowd and cries. In the second stanza of the poem, the speaker narrator continues narrating the old story from the event to the readers. People were rejoicing by ringing bells, and the entire atmosphere was thick. You see here the mist, that is thick with the atmosphere, was very thick with its noise, the noise of the bells. The air broke into a mist with bells means that the sound of the bells, the ringing which they were ringing in the honor of the speaker, made the air thick with its sound. So the next line points, the old walls rocked with the crowds and cries. The narrator continues to give us an account of his grand reception that he received a year ago and says that the crowds of overwhelming delighted people were standing on some kind of old structure and cheering for the Patriot with their cries rocking the wall. So the walls were rocked by the cries of the people. The city's old walls was rocking as a crowd of people were everywhere to have a glimpse of the Patriot and to welcome him. So the next line, have I, you can see the crowd of people on the roofs and the shouts going on. So it says, had I said, good folk, mere noise repels, but give me your sun, your yonder skies. They had answered, and afterwards, what else? So the Patriot says that at that moment, he was the hero. And if he had said that this kind of noise is repelling, that is sickening or disgusting. Repels means it's very disgusting or sickening to him. And would he have asked for the sun at that moment from the distant sky? Meaning, had he asked the public, the people, for anything at that moment, even the dearest things on which their sustenance depends, they would have readily given it to him. Such great was his image. And the last line says, they had answered, and afterwards, what else? So this stanza shows that the exuberance or excitement of the people at the sight of the speaker. So we can see here the poet Robert Browning is trying to establish the kind of popularity the speaker narrator had in his country through the first two stanzas. Now we move to the third stanza. Now it says, alack, it was I who leaped at the sun. Now let's see the first two lines. Alack, alack meaning an exclamation. It's a word of regret or dismay. So, alack, it was I who leaped at the sun to give it my loving friends to keep. So, in this stanza, the speaker tells us what he did, what all he did for his country. It begins with the poet's subtle reference to the old mythological tale of Icarus and Daedalus. Icarus was the son of the great inventor Daedalus. The reference is about the escape of these two men from a high tower where they were held prisoners by making wings out of bird feathers and wax. Icarus, excited with his ability of flight, flies too closer to the sun, which causes the wax in his wings to melt and eventually falls and is killed. Just like Icarus, the speaker now remembers Icarus at the moment. Probably the distant memory, in his memory, he's got Icarus and he thinks just like Icarus. He admits and regrets that. Probably that is why he says alack, meaning alas. So that he too was overly ambitious, more than what was needed, and he leaped at the sun. Leaping at the sun signifies trying to do what is impossible, something that is beyond reach, and trying to do that. So he says, alack, it was I who leaped at the sun to give it my loving friends to keep. Now this suggests that his action somehow caused the death of his own friends. So it's here again we can hypothesize that or suggest that the Patriot is talking about some battle that claimed the lives of his dear ones. So it may be, let's read the next two lines and what it says. Not man could do have I left undone, and you see my harvest, what I reap, this very day now a year is run. So the narrator regrets and says that the people loved and trusted the Patriot so much that they were instantly ready to fetch the sun for him. So the condition in the second stanza, he tells us the condition of how much he was trusted and loved. And in this third stanza, it says that not man could do. He did something that no man could do. But he loved his people so much that it was he who leaped for the sun. He leaped for it and presented it to them. That is, he did the impossible, what no man could do. This was what no man could do. And then after a year, when the Patriot looks at the result of what he has given to the people, he finds it to be disheartening. He did everything a man could have done to make things right. Despite this, he is facing his undeserved end. And he says, this is what I reap. The term harvest and reap are closely seen as these are common metaphors for karma. So the poet uses this to convey what he is facing is not what he truly deserves. So he says it has been a year since that day. Here the poet ends the speaker narrator's flashback. So in the third stanza, the poet narrator ends his flashback. But then he says in the next line, let's read the next stanza. There's nobody on the housetops now. Let's read the first two lines first. There's nobody on the housetops now, just a palsied few at the windows set. Now, the speaker narrator is describing what he sees presently. In the earlier three stanzas, we saw that the speaker narrator was reminiscing the past, and he was talking about all that happened in the past a year ago, exactly a year ago. This was his condition. So he was so much trusted, he was so much loved, and people considered him to be a god. But now things are not like that. There's nobody on the rooftops now. So he's telling us the present situation at the moment, as exactly a year later, once again he's being led, but this time he has been convicted and is being led to the gallows to be put to death. So he describes the present setting and in a way contrasts it with the one on the same day a year ago. Once again he's been taken through the streets, but this time there is no one on the housetops. There are nobody on the rooftops cheering him. He can only see a few palsied people. Palsied meaning paralyzed people. People who are taken by palsy or paralysis and who are unable to cross the threshold of their houses. They are left beside the windows as they cannot move, and they are the only ones watching the Patriot as he marches towards his death. So let's next line. For the best of the sight is all allow at the Shambles Gate, or better yet, by the very scaffold's foot I trove. So Shambles Gate is a place where people assemble to watch public hangings. This is what Shambles Gate means. Scaffold is a raised wooden platform used formerly for the public execution of criminals. So people were hanged at the scaffold and or killed or their heads cut off, chopped off. So trove means it's an archaic use to mean think or I believe, something like that. So let's see what the first three lines of the fourth stanza mean. The Patriot is reminded of his past. His condition has now changed to the exact opposite of what he had gone through just 1 year ago. At that time, he enjoyed people's trust and admiration, which is now gone, and he has now been adjudged a traitor and is sentenced to death. The narrator now says that the reason why no one is there to see the Patriot is because people have gathered at the Shambles Gate. That is the place where the Patriot is about to be hanged publicly. The people want to be where the action is. They now wish to see him hanged. The speaker, the Patriot, further makes this heart-touching comment, and he says in the last two lines, at the Shambles, all will allow, all will agree with me that the best, now look at that, at the Shambles Gate, or better yet, by the very scaffold foot I trove. I believe the best sight is at the gate of the slaughterhouse. Shambles Gate is the slaughterhouse because that's a place where he is going to be killed. Or at the very foot of the scaffold, because at the best sight, the best place or the best scene of action would be at the scaffold. And that is why the people are gathered there. He remarks so because the same people, the very same people, his townspeople, now, a year ago, they were cheering for him, but exactly after 1 year, they wish to see him hanged, thus making it their best sight. So let's move on to the fifth, and you can see the crowd here and the scaffold here. So the scaffold where the people have gathered to see, this is the Shambles Gate, and the people have gathered here to see the execution, to be how the execution is going. You can see the olden picture of the Shambles Gate, where the huge crowd has gathered. Everyone is at this place right now. They are not in their homes. They have come here to see what is going to happen to this man. And that's what it says. You can see this is a scaffold. So this is how they hang. This is the wooden plank, and they are now fixing up the plank and everything, getting ready to hang the person. So you can see the two ropes hanging from where the person would be hanged. This is the scaffold. So we move on to the fifth stanza. I go in the rain. Now let's see what it means. I go in the rain, and more than needs, a rope cuts both my wrists behind. The fifth stanza, of course, is the continuation of the previous stanza and further describes the speaker's humiliation at the hands of his people, his own people. So he describes the scene by telling us that it is raining and he walks towards the scaffold. So he's walking the same way he was walking, with a large crowd going together, but this time there's nobody, but he is walking and it's raining and he's walking up to the scaffold for the execution. His hands are tied behind. So his hands are tied with a rope. You can see a rope cuts both my wrists behind. So they are so tightly tied up that it cuts his wrists. There are bruises, wrists are cut. They were bleeding. He has now arrived closer to the Shambles Gate, where all the people are gathered. The patriot in his own mind, knowing the certainty of death ahead him. So let's see the next lines. And I think by the field my forehead bleeds, for they fling, whoever has a mind, stones at me for my years' misdeeds. Now, as he is walking, he thinks he is bleeding from his forehead. So he can only feel the trickling of blood. People throwing stones at him are causing the injuries. Stones have replaced the petals of roses. Once they were roses, now they are stones. People are flinging stones at him. What a turnaround. He says that the people who are throwing stones are the ones who have an active mind, who has a mind, whoever has a mind, and are aware of his misdeeds. He calls it his years' misdeeds. So the speaker doesn't seem to be very angry with these people for throwing stones at him. This suggests that despite the treatment he is receiving, he does not blame the people. He knows that they have misunderstood him. So let's go on to the sixth and the final stanza. Thus I entered, and thus I go. In triumphs people have dropped down dead. Paid by the world, what dost thou owe me? God might question. Now instead, it's God shall repay. I am safer so. Now, the last stanza of the poem reflects on the patriot's death. It is full of philosophical and religious ideas. Thus I entered, and thus I go. His entry and exit from life, position, and the people's minds in the presence of so many others sums up the speaker's life well. In the second line, he says, in triumphs, people have dropped him down dead. This suggests that he looks at his predicament as a triumph. So he's looking at it like a triumph. And he says here, he believed that he stood by the right thing, and thus considered himself victorious in defeat. So the final three lines of the stanza, paid by the world, what dost thou owe me? Now this is what he says God might question. So he says that he had been paid by the world. He believes that God might say, your sins were already washed away when you died. The people punished you. What now do you expect from me? So God might ask him, you are now free of all corruptions. Thus the patriot thinks that the punishment he got in the mortal world has purged him, and that he hopes to go to heaven instead of hell. He feels safer. He says he feels safer knowing that God knows he stood for what he thought was right, and thus he will be safe under him. He thinks that it is good that he met his death, as it is now God's turn to pay him for his deeds. And therefore he thinks he is in safer hands. So, but one thing we can say, as children, as we have seen in these stanza, that we do not know about the misdeeds that the patriot talks about himself. Neither do we know whether he was innocent, for it is not mentioned in the poem. On one hand, we see him admitting that he did some misdeeds, and on the other hand, we see him as a patriot who is mistaken, which is the title itself suggests. It might be so that he is guilty of something he did which he thought were right. It might even be so that he is truly innocent and is simply put to death because the people wish so. So the poem ends on an optimistic note with the poet's own philosophy. God's in heaven and all's right with the world. The patriot believes that it is God who will reward him actually according to his true merit. I hope the poem was explained clearly and you have understood it well. Thanks for watching.